voices were first heard in the 50s, yet still resonate today. This is Teen Idol's Week, our look at singers who dominated the charts and transformed pop music. Tonight, Leslie Gore, who sang about teenage angst and made the rest of us feel her pain. Leslie Gore is in the process of recording an album that includes both new material and her old standards. You Don't Own Me, It's My Party. When she became a teen idol, Leslie Gore was still a teen herself with little formal musical training, but a remarkable ability to sing straight from the heart.
The early 1960s were an incredible party for Leslie Gore.
Leslie Gore came to the party. She came to make music.
It's My Party happened, you know, absolutely out of the blue. And the next thing, she was on the radio and, you know, she was doing performances and she was on the Ed Sullivan Show.
Leslie's instantly recognizable voice and a hip young producer created a teenage star.
Once Quincy Jones takes an interest in somebody, you got yourself almost a guaranteed insured success.
People would have one or two hits, but she kept going and going.
When she sang an anthem of independence, Leslie found her true voice.
Leslie was very politically oriented. You Don't Own Me. It was, that stuff was pretty strong.
You don't own me. No, don't try to change me.
She always had strong feelings about people and always stood up for what she believed.
Don't tie me down. I will never stay.
At the end of World War II, Brooklyn, New York was a vibrant, multicultural part of New York City. Leo and Ronnie Gore were childhood sweethearts who married and settled in an apartment right in the heart of Brooklyn. Leo had studied dentistry, but found that staring into people's mouths was not his true calling. He quit and went into a highly successful clothing business with his brother, the Peter Pan Bras and Girdle Company. Ronnie modeled hats at local stores, but gave it up when they wanted to start a family. Ronnie and Leo were thrilled when she gave birth to Leslie Sue Gore in Brooklyn, New York on May 2nd, 1946. Baby Leslie showed a talent for music very early on.
Leslie sang when she was about 6 months old. She would hum tunes. She couldn't speak, but she would hum all the tunes that she heard on the radio.
At the age of 3, Leslie also played the family record player. She knew what each record was by the color of the label, and she learned all the words. Quite a feat for a little girl who hadn't yet learned to read.
One of the very first things I can remember my dad buying was a tape recorder that you made these little discs from, where you literally recorded and you brushed away the acetate and you had a record. My dad loved that machine, and we used to spend many an hour with me singing in front of this machine, and I used to think of my dad as my recording engineer.
Just as Leslie's brother Michael was born in 1950, the family moved into a dream home that they had built in the exclusive suburban town of Tenafly, New Jersey. Tenafly was a family-friendly place where the wives stayed at home and the men traveled daily to work in New York City.
It was a very peaceful, kind of, you know, typical suburban town, but yet 20 minutes away was all of New York City. So, you know, as a kid growing up, I think we were in the city, you know, 3-4 times a week.
The Gore family made sure that their children were exposed to the things that New York City had to offer, especially music.
My parents took us to the midnight show of Ella Fitzgerald at Basin Street East. And I remember being snuck in sort of under my mother's mink coat because they didn't let 10-year-old kids into a midnight show at Basin Street East. But my parents wanted to see Ella Fitzgerald, and they wanted us to hear Ella Fitzgerald.
Although they appreciated music, Leo and Ronnie did not intend to have their children study it.
My parents brought a piano into the house, really kind of to fill a hole in the wall in the living room, and my brother went and he got a couple of big telephone books and he sat up on the chair. Next thing I know, he was bass chording Fly Me to the Moon with a little melody on the right hand. And I said to myself, wow, I've got a piano player. This is great.
Our parents had parties. We used to be the entertainment. At the end of the evening, we used to sit down and, I sat at the piano and we'd sing, all the Rodgers and Hart songs and the Gershwin songs and Smoke Gets in Your Eyes. And, it was wonderful.
Leslie's passion for singing was intensified when her parents brought her to see her first Broadway musical.
I was about 11 or 12 when I first saw My Fair Lady. It was the very first musical I had ever seen. And several weeks after, my mother and father knew I enjoyed it, and they asked me if I wanted to go see another musical. And I said, yes, but I really want to see My Fair Lady again. And this happened for another 12 times. I was so taken with this. I never thought anything else could be as good.
Inspired by the musical, Leslie decided she wanted to sing on the Broadway stage.
I just had this compelling desire to be able to sing and to figure out the right way to do it. There were times as a young child I'd realize I'd go to sing something and it might not turn out the same way twice, or it didn't sound as good as I wanted it to, and I was eager to find out how to make it sound the way I wanted to all of the time.
Anxious to become a professional singer, Leslie pushed her parents to enroll her at Dwight, a private school in the neighboring town of Inglewood that was known for its classical music program. Driven by a desire to perform, the next step the 15-year-old took was to search for a vocal coach in New York City.
She came home and she said, that's what I want to do. I want to take singing lessons. And I said, Leslie, I have carpool. All I do is run carpools back and forth to school with you and Michael. And to go to New York is a big hassle. I'm running a house and family and husband.
Leslie persisted and arranged to meet Myron Pappy Earnhardt, a well-known vocal coach in the heart of New York's music district, which included both the Ed Sullivan Theater and the Brill Building. Crammed with music publishers, composers, and musicians, New York City in the early 1960s was a place where the new sounds and stars of music were being created.
Rock and roll had just started to happen, and it was really coming into its own, and there was so much life and so much camaraderie.
Leslie desperately wanted to be part of that world, but her parents had a different opinion.
I was just horrified, and so was my husband. Whatever we had heard about show business was not what we thought we wanted our daughter to do. So it was quite a problem for us.
It was the first thing I did, I think, that was independent of anybody else. Maybe that was a very special thing for me also. It was not something my parents did, not something my brother did, not something really anyone I know did. It was just mine.
Leslie was chomping at the bit to record, and her singing coach wanted to take her into the studio. But first, he had to overcome her parents' objections.
He said, she's got to be here once a week. And I said, I'm sorry, but that's impossible. We live in New Jersey, and it's just going to be too much for me to bring her in. And he said, I think she's so terrific that I will come and get her if you bring her over the George Washington Bridge. Well, when I heard that, I felt this small.
My family's reaction, I think, in retrospect, was that they let Leslie go ahead and do these recordings because they were told by a close family friend, it'll never happen. Let her get it out of her system. If you say no to her, she will never, never forgive you. But, you know, the chances of anybody hitting on this kind of thing are kind of 1 in a million.
With the odds seemingly stacked against her, 16-year-old Leslie Gore was determined to become a professional singer. She had spent her childhood at the piano, and now she wanted to sing for a wider audience. By a series of coincidences, Leslie would get to meet a man who would give her not only a chance to sing, but instant stardom.
You are watching Leslie Gore, part of Teen Idol's Week on Biography.
16-year-old Leslie Gore arranged to record several demos and sang her heart out. At first, Leslie only played those recordings for her friends. Eventually, through a set of incredible circumstances, the demos made their way to a man who would set Leslie on the path to rock and roll fame, Quincy Jones.
Those demos got to Quincy Jones, really through a miracle. My cousin was a fight promoter, and he was handling a wonderful welterweight champion by the name of Emil Griffith. And there was an agent by the name of Joe Glazer who was handling Emil. And my cousin, Howard Albert, brought my demos to Joe Glazer. Joe heard them, thought they sounded pretty good, sent them to his best friend, Irving Green, over at Mercury Records. Irving thought they sounded pretty good, so he threw them on Quincy's desk.
I met her voice first before I met her in person. She had this incredible, youthful sound, but really in tune like a jazz singer. And she had a personality. In 20 seconds, you could recognize her voice, and I like that. So not a lot of people sang in tune in those days in pop music, so I like that too.
Meeting Quincy was a new experience for Leslie. She was a naive little Jewish girl from the suburbs. He was a hotshot producer who was making a big name for himself.
He was kind of like a big kid. He was very easy to get along with, and very sweet and very endearing, very concerned about me as a musician and what I wanted to do with my music.
Quincy promised to look for material for Leslie to sing, and 2 weeks later, a large limousine arrived at her house in Tenafly. He had over 200 songs for Leslie to consider.
And we listened to It's My Party first, and because I'd never done this before, I said, well, that's a pretty good song. Let's put it in the maybe pile. And we listened to the rest of the 200 songs, and that was the only song we had at the end of 200. So there was something about that song that I knew I related to as a 16-year-old kid.
Just days later, Quincy took young Leslie into the recording studio. She now had to show her stuff.
She was, you know, a musician. There was something about, she was very mature for her age. Just the way she talked to people was very gracious, very funny, and certainly tons of energy in the room. The string players who are, you know, notoriously kind of just do their work and get out, wrap their bows on the stands. I'll never forget that. I thought, oh my God, we got, like, it's like a classical artist.
They took our child away from us and they put her in a booth. And she had a stand in front of her, a bottle of Coca-Cola in one hand, a pencil in her ear, and she had these big earphones on, and Quincy was talking to her through the microphone, and he was saying to her, Leslie, take one from the top and two from the bottom. And I looked at my husband and I said, I don't know what he's talking about, do you? And Leo said, no, I don't, but she knew, and she took the pencil, and she knew exactly what to do in that studio with all the musicians, and we just looked at each other in amazement because we didn't know, how did she know what to do?
You won't find too many pop singers singing hit songs, #1 songs with the harmonic elements that Leslie sang. And like, seriously, just the first part of the verse of It's My Part. I mean, Jesus, nobody tackled music like that then. It was very, very progressive harmonically and melodically.
But Quincy didn't know that another producer, Phil Spector, had just recorded the same song with one of the hottest girl groups around.
We recorded 2 songs on a Saturday, got out of there about 4 or 5 o'clock, and I went to Carnegie Hall. As I got there, another limo was pulling up, and inside was Phil Spector. And he got out with his cape and everything. He said, I just cut a smash, you know, with the crystals called It's My Party. I said, what? To myself.
Immediately, Quincy rushed back into the studio to press more copies of the recording. 24 hours later, he mailed out 100 copies of the song to radio stations across the country.
It's great we got this great song, but we've got to change that name, Leslie. That name is not working, you know. And so I went to Japan. I said, I'll be back in 3 weeks and we'll work on the range. We had sent the records out already, though. So when I called into Chicago one day to talk to Irving Green, said, "How are we doing with the name?" And he says, "You haven't heard, have you?" He says, "The record's #1. Yeah, how do you like the name now?" I said, "It's perfect. It's just right."
I remember playing Leslie Gore's record, It's My Party, and I remember the phones lit up, and I said, well, what's going on? I said, what did I say? Did I say something naughty on the radio? In those days, I mean, you couldn't even go 2 degrees to the left or the right. You get in a lot of trouble. Picked up the phone, and people say, hey, would you play that again? Who's that by? Who's the Leslie Gore? Where does she come from? And then, of course, when I said, hey, it's a local gal out of New Jersey. She's a New York, New Jersey kid. Well, that did it.
In June of 1963, 1 month after Leslie's 17th birthday, It's My Party hit #1 on the Billboard chart.
It's My Party, I think, climbed the charts faster than I could ever remember. And I was pretty young, and I thought, my God, here's a record that I've engineered, and it's on the radio. I mean, there was nothing more prideful for an artist, and I think that that's what Leslie felt, too. I mean, the next time we saw each other, everybody was like hugging each other, you know. Oh my God, we're on the top.
Leslie was an overnight success. Determination, talent, and luck had all lined up to create a star. But the little girl from the suburbs would find that stardom would demand more of her than she bargained for.
You are watching Teen Idols Week here on Biography.
In the spring of 1963, Leslie Gore rocketed to overnight stardom with her hit song, It's My Party. Now she was faced with learning what it would take to hold on to that fame. Leslie had to prove that she was not a one-hit wonder. Quincy took her back into the studio. He pushed 17-year-old Leslie to show what she could do.
Once I got there and realized what my function was, and all these people were there for me, it was just like a dream come true. So I got into the work. I mean, I was there to do what I had to do. And Quincy set it all up so it was perfect for me. All I had to do was walk in and be myself.
Quincy Jones would say things like, let's do that, let's double track that, let's do this, let's do that, which is one of the things you'd find in the way her records were made, and the way Quincy Jones is so incredible with musical tastes.
Leslie's hard work paid off. Judy's Turn to Cry followed It's My Party to #5 on the Billboard charts. With the success of Judy's Turn to Cry, Leslie's stardom was assured. It was a time when there were very few solo girl singers, but Leslie was dubbed rock and roll's the Princess of Song.
That particular period of time was dominated by male groups, and who were doing exceptionally well. And when one of us broke through, either as a female group and or as an individual like she did, it's quite an accomplishment.
To further Leslie's musical education, Quincy took her to see performances of many of the artists she had listened to as a child, including Lena Horne and Peggy Lee.
She responded like you wanted her to respond, to pay attention to people that have been doing this for 50 years. Leslie just ate it all up, and when you talk about Lena and Peggy, you're talking about 100 years of experience.
As Leslie's popularity soared, she appeared on countless television shows like Hullabaloo, American Bandstand, and Shindig. But Leslie found that live performances were very different from her work in the studio. The challenge was terrifying.
It's a lot to ask of a little kid, you know, really, because they get a #1 record. People don't even think about it. They have to go out and do performances, and they probably had never done it before, maybe just with their cousins or family or so.
I think I threw up for 3 months before I actually did the Ed Sullivan Show. It was frightening because I really hadn't a tremendous amount of experience in front of an audience, and this was about the biggest audience, live audience you could get at that time. And so I was pretty nervous about it, but they were very nice. Ed Sullivan actually got my name right, so I was thrilled at that. And he called me over afterwards, so that was supposed to be a great thing. So I got through my first Ed Sullivan without too many train wrecks.
In an effort to combat the pressure, Leslie adopted a polished image.
Leslie was so different from all of us. I mean, Leslie wore business suits. I mean, that was like a grown-up person wearing suits. And we wore our little frilly dresses, you know. She's always kind of been focused.
Over the next year, Leslie managed to maintain her focus on both high school and her career. She got top marks in her classes while continuing her flurry of hit-making songs. In the fall of 1963, Leslie recorded Maybe I Know, which rose to the top 20.
Talking about, I bet they all think I'll never find out. Oh, but maybe I know that he's been a cheating. Maybe I know that he's been untrue. But what can I do? My friends are telling me that he's no good. He isn't treating me the way he should. He really loves me. That's all I can say before my tears fall. I just walk away. Whoa, but maybe I know that he's been a cheat. Maybe I know that he's been untrue. But what can I do? Whoa, deep down inside he loves me, though he may run around. Deep down inside he loves me.
Leslie's image as the girl next door who had dating trouble struck a deep chord with the teenagers of America. She began to receive thousands of fan letters. Many of these were full of the pain and tragedies of other young girls' lives.
They were pretty devastatingly sad, some of them. Especially for a kid like myself who was growing up pretty much in Pleasantville, USA, which what Tenafly really was. It was a beautiful place to be growing up. If anything was really wrong, it was either minor or you were unaware of it. And so these were problems that I just was not, I'd never been aware that youngsters went through such difficult times. And I think that was really the impact that it had on me, that there was a real life out there.
Leslie was affected by her fan mail, and she began to feel she had some responsibility to those teens. She wanted to have more input into the material she was singing, but voicing her opinion to an experienced producer like Quincy Jones was not easy.
Leslie had a hard time sometimes knowing where to draw the line between being the artist and being feminine and going, excuse me, this is what I want, and really being assertive without being harsh or hard or something like that. And that was a rough time for women at that time to do that, I know. I used to watch her struggle.
I wanted to somehow break away, but there wasn't a role model to show me how. I had these feelings that I didn't really know what to do with.
17-year-old Leslie Gore was the voice of every teenage girl in America, but her own personal opinions were buried deep in her perfect teen image. Leslie would soon find a song that would become an anthem of emancipation for both her and an entire generation of women.
Biography.com wants to hear from you. Which of these is your favorite Leslie Gore song?
Lollipops and rainbows, everything that's wonderful is sure to come your way.
Visit Biography.com and vote now.
Leslie Gore had stayed at the pinnacle of the musical charts for 2 years. Nicknamed the Princess of Song, her first hits were cries of teenage dating angst. But in the fan mail she was receiving, Leslie was learning that many teens in America were living a much harsher life. The 1960s was a time of great social change for women. Feminism was becoming a force to be reckoned with. As a young female performer, immersed in the male-dominated music industry, Leslie was beginning to find that she wanted songs that spoke more of her own experience.
Growing up in the 40s and 50s, everything was very pleasant. Young girls were supposed to be seen but not heard. Young women, we were always supposed to be nice, be sweet. My father used to say all the time, boys don't make passes at girls who wear glasses. We were getting a lot of these messages, and I heard them, I was absorbing them, but I didn't care for them. Something really just didn't sit well with me.
When she was choosing songs to record, Leslie would often simply follow Quincy's instructions. But in the fall of 1964, 17-year-old Leslie read the words to You Don't Own Me and insisted that she record it.
When I heard, don't tell me what to say, don't tell me what to do, that felt so great to me. I knew I wanted to stand up there and shake my finger at everyone and say, don't tell me what to do.
And
Own Me was released in November of 1964. By December, it was one of Leslie's biggest hits. Leslie's image of the young girl crying at the party was changed forever.
I remember the first time I heard You Don't Own Me, I said, wow, this is kind of revolutionary. What's this little chick, the girl next door who was so sweet, you know, I can cry, let me cry, I lost my boyfriend. All of a sudden making a tremendous, tough, strong statement, representing womanhood, representing girlhood. And this was very important, I think a very important step in Lesley Gore's career. She suddenly became the spokesperson for all young females to say, hey, keep off, buddy, out of line. You don't own me, nobody owns me.
It was making a statement which wasn't said at the beginning of the women's movement. It wasn't talked about much then. And it was man's world.
Just as Leslie was declaring her independence in her choice of songs, she was also facing tough decisions about her future. Always a very bright student, she had promised her parents that regardless of her singing career, she would continue on to college.
My parents and I sat down and they said to me, well, you know, what's it going to be? Are you just going to finish high school and that's going to be it? And I knew how important education was to me. I knew how important it was for me to go to college. And I said to them, look, I do promise you that whatever happens here, whether the song is a hit or not, I'm going to go on to college.
She loved literature. She loved reading. She loved French. She really, really got off on going to class. And it's something that she didn't want to miss out on.
Leslie was faced with putting her career on hold. At the age of 18, with a string of top 40 hits and several gold records, she left the world of recording and went to Sarah Lawrence College in Bronxville, New York.
She walked out of the studio and went to Sarah Lawrence. And she always knew the value of her education, so she stayed with school. That's really hard. Most kids don't do that. They just say, hey, let the good times roll, let's get it on. You know, I'm going to make a record here, and I don't need to go to school.
For a time, Leslie juggled both the world of rock and roll and school, squeezing her appearances into the school holiday. Underscoring the differences of the two worlds she inhabited, Leslie was asked to perform at the Tammy Show alongside James Brown, the Supremes, Smokey Robinson, and the Rolling Stones.
It was a tremendous high. I don't know how else to explain it. Sometimes you feel like you're levitating, like your feet aren't even on the ground.
In 1965, Leslie appeared in the hit teen movies Girls on the Beach and Ski Party, and she recorded Sunshine, Lollipops, and Rainbows, written by Marvin Hamlish.
My godfather is a Dr. Lester Coleman. Dr. Lester Coleman was taking care of Quincy Jones. The next thing you know, my godfather's got the tongue depressor in his mouth and saying, by the way, you know, I've got this kid who's written this song that I think you should really hear, you know. And so I sent this demo to Quincy Jones. And the next thing I swear that I heard about was that there was this motion picture that they were doing, and they needed a song that was going to be on a bus to take her from one side of the beach to the other side of the beach. And the next thing I know, there it was. Our song was recorded. I couldn't believe it. And I said, thank God I got the right godfather here.
Sunshine, Lollipops, and Rainbows was Leslie's 9th hit song in 2 years. She also appeared on Batman.
We were on a plane and she had her typewriter in front of her, paid no attention to anybody on the plane, and she was typing away because she knew she had to get her reports in for school.
As Leslie was working to finish college, America was experiencing a period of enormous racial unrest. Black political leader Malcolm X had been gunned down, and Martin Luther King was speaking out for racial equality. Leslie's own state of New Jersey was ablaze with race riots. While she was at Sarah Lawrence, Leslie heard Robert Kennedy speak out against racial prejudice. She immediately signed on to work for his campaign.
Bobby Kennedy was really the first person I can remember learning a social conscience from, having a desire to actually go out and help people and try and better this world, and it was all because of him. He seemed to have such charisma, and everything he said seemed so possible then. You looked into his eyes, and I could sense that the pain that I felt when I read fan mail that hurt me so deeply. I looked into his eyes, and I felt that Robert Kennedy understood people's pain.
Leslie worked long hours on the campaign trail and performed at fundraisers for Robert Kennedy. But in 1967, Leslie began to receive threatening letters and phone calls. A stalker started to harass her. He contacted her at the college and said he was traveling across the United States in order to get her.
It was kind of watching a play unfold in front of me, because I was at college, and he would call the college and get me on the school phone.
After several months of menacing phone calls, the stalker showed up on campus.
One of my friends realized that he was there and looking for me, and his behavior became somewhat irritated when he couldn't find me at school, and he started throwing over some tables in the caf, and someone called the police.
The stalker was arrested. Leslie returned to classes. While she was studying at Sarah Lawrence, the music industry was changing and moving on to a different sound.
Everybody was upset because we only number 2 with You Don't Own Me, until I had to remind them that, you see what's number 1? I Want to Hold Your Hand. The invasion, the Beatles were just getting ready to just trample everything.
The British invasion knocked us all out of the bag. It was like the independent songwriter went, duh, what am I going to do now?
When Leslie entered college in 1964, she was a rock and roll star singing teenage love songs. But as she was graduating in 1968, the world was a very different place. The Vietnam War had intensified. Martin Luther King was assassinated, and just days from Leslie's graduation, Senator Robert Kennedy was gunned down.
I was watching TV in my dorm room at the time that he was shot, and I immediately called Pat Kingsley, my press agent, who had just a direct line into what was going on. And we spent pretty much 12 hours on the telephone, her giving me all the info that came in, and just spent that weekend crying.
When Bobby Kennedy was killed, Leslie lost a leader she believed in. She was also faced with a very different world of music. Protest songs were dominating the airwaves, and Janis Joplin was at the top of the charts.
The music just changed. And I think that was a tough period for Leslie. I think it's very hard to go from, having #1 songs on the radio to all of a sudden replaced by, other artists.
Unlike her fellow graduates, 22-year-old Leslie was faced with rebuilding a career. Dropped by Mercury, her first and only record label, Leslie's recording career floundered as she searched for another record label.
After Leslie left Mercury Records, and she went to Crew Records in 1970, and they were having financial trouble. And she just, the music she was making was terrific, but the financial backing that wasn't there.
The early 70s was probably the most difficult period for me. I kind of had to reevaluate my life in terms of where I was going. I probably could have gone back to school and become a lawyer or a doctor, but what I discovered fully in my heart at that time was there was nothing more important to me than music.
Leslie had a passion for music, for performing, so she would have to somehow, somewhere, remain in the industry.
Leslie turned to studying music and writing songs.
What it did for me was I got up in the morning and I took my cup of coffee and I went to the piano. So I felt like a musician every day. And I started writing songs. And the first few songs were really pretty bad. And they got better and better. And that was what I think gave me the motivation to continue as a musician.
By 1975, with collaborator Ellen Weston, Leslie had an entire album's worth of songs, which she brought to Quincy Jones.
It really was, and she had grown, my God, as a writer and wrote fantastic songs. So Love Me by Name is a fantastic song, one of my favorite songs.
The new album was a critical hit, but the record-buying public didn't want to hear Leslie sing anything other than her teen music. The album died on the shelf, and with it, Leslie's dream of making a recording comeback.
A terrific album, unfortunately, again, because of the stigma of being a 60s artist, the record company and the music business in general wouldn't take her seriously. They didn't listen to the music itself. They didn't listen to what her talent was. They just said Leslie Gore, so it can't be good.
She was pigeonholed into a very specific area of rock and roll. And in a way, it's a shame because she can do more.
Though her star had fallen in the world of rock and roll, in 1980, a whole new opportunity opened up for Leslie. She got the chance to work with her brother on the hit musical film Fame.
I think there was something about Leslie that could really relate to the character of Coco, you know, out here on my own, and what that character was going through.
Leslie's song, Out Here on My Own, and her brother Michael's theme song from Fame were each nominated for an Oscar. But on the night of the awards, her brother won.
I won the Oscar, she didn't, and I'm sure she was disappointed. I'm sure she would like to have had the Oscar.
Leslie did not let that disappointment stop her. Through the 1980s, she toured constantly. Her old record companies had kept most of the royalties from her earlier hits, claiming that Leslie had incurred massive expenses. Leslie was broke.
Right after I recorded It's My Party, the first check that came in June of '63 was for about $16,000 or $17,000. After that, I didn't see another penny from Mercury Records until 1989, which would make it 25 years.
With financial difficulties and a failed album, Leslie Gore was searching for new ways to maintain her passion for music. A chance meeting would give her a lifelong friend and mentor who would renew Leslie's belief in herself.
You are watching Leslie Gore, part of Teen Idol's Week on
self-confidence and a place in the music business. Though she'd been nominated for an Oscar for songwriting, she was no longer on the Billboard charts and didn't have a recording career. In the late 1980s, Leslie met Bella Abzug. Abzug was an ardent feminist who spoke her mind.
I think meeting Bella showed me that freedom for the first time. A fabulous woman, but not a woman who was going to be a nice little girl. And somehow that answered a lot of questions for me, seeing that I could act like Bella. I could be a strong, powerful woman, and that was all right. That felt really good. That helped me a lot toward independence.
With renewed spirit, Leslie developed a show that included not only her hits, but the songs of Sarah Vaughan and Ella Fitzgerald. In October of 1991, Leslie hit the stage at the famed Rainbow and Stars Room in Rockefeller Center in New York City.
This audience came, and she had to win them over. And boy, did she kick.
She could be much more expressive and much more intimate with the audience, which she loves to do.
In the audience was the man who'd been with her since the beginning, Quincy Jones.
He came to Rainbows and Stars, I think one of the last times that Leslie appeared there. And when she finished and everybody stood up and everybody was cheering, he walked onto the stage in Rainbow and Stars and lifted her up, and the audience just went wild. It was a night to remember.
In the 1990s, Leslie toured Japan, Australia, and England. She continued to write songs for Hollywood, but while Leslie's career was hitting new heights, her personal life was about to take a frightening turn. In 1994, Leslie found herself fearing for her safety again. A young songwriter with whom she'd worked turned into a stalker.
The fears begin to mount, and that's when it becomes, it's not just one fear. You're suddenly fearful that you're going to have to deal with somebody on the street. Every time you pick up the phone, this guy is going to be on the phone. This guy was calling me at one point 80 times a day. It was getting, so you couldn't really even pick up the phone to answer normally just to your friends. It invades every part of your life.
Leslie finally sought the help of the police, and after nearly 2 years of being terrorized, she had her life back. And she was also back in the spotlight when the 1996 film The First Wives Club used You Don't Own Me on its soundtrack.
I was walking my dog during that time. The theater that was playing First Wives Club was on 72nd Street and 3rd Avenue. So I used to kind of figure my dog walks kind of as the movie was breaking, and I'd listen to everybody come out singing You Don't Own Me. It felt kind of wonderful.
But even as she was taking joy in the reemergence of her hit song, the late 1990s also brought great loss. In March of 1998, Leslie's dear friend and mentor, Bella Abzug, died.
Leslie was one of the pallbearers when they carried Bella out, which was very sad. Leslie, to this day, I'm sure, misses her greatly.
Later that same year, the man who was the first to record his little girl's voice, Leo Gore, died on May 21st, 1998, of cancer.
After he was gone for the first year, I felt he was very much with me. I felt he was always kind of looking over my shoulder, and I felt very close to him during that time.
In mourning, Leslie retreated to spend some time in quiet reflection. She resolved to give more time to her personal life.
I think to some degree, having a career has overshadowed my personal life. There were times that I was just much too involved with traveling and writing songs and being a musician, and maybe let my personal life lapse. But I think I was aware when everything was going down that I was really making a choice for music. I didn't marry. I didn't marry young enough to have children. So I think there must have been something conscious operating.
Leslie also resolved to fulfill her lifelong dream of singing on Broadway.
Not only can she sing rock and roll, but to me she was always like someone that should have been on Broadway. I always listen to that voice and I think that girl should be on Broadway. That voice is so clear, so wonderful when it comes to rhythm, so able to understand every lyric. This was really unique. So it's a wonderful voice. To me, it's a very stagey voice, and I love that about her.
In 1999, Leslie starred in Broadway's long-running hit, Smokey Joe's Cafe.
Smokey Joe's Cafe was a great opportunity for her. Leslie loves collaboration, and I think she really got a kick out of having an entire cast around her every night.
Today, with fans all over the world, Leslie continues to both write and perform. With her instantly recognizable voice, Leslie Gore is still proudly singing her hits.
Every era has its own sound. And Leslie very clearly, has made her own mark back there for those, in the 60s that can never be replaced.
Leslie's grown from an innocent teen to a woman with her own songs to sing. The party is still going on.
Seeing her recently perform in nightclubs and big cafes, Leslie Gore still does it. Still does it. Comes from the heart.
If you look at her performing, you see this, she's got all the energy that she had when she was a teenager, but it's got this incredible passion for music.
The truth is, she opens up that mouth, that voice comes out, and it's perfectly in tune. It really is. It's just shot on, right there. Great musician.
Leslie Gore is an original.
I'm going to make music until the day I die. On my own.
Leslie Gore will soon be touring along with Lou Christie and Benny King in a show called Holiday Reunion. The party that began nearly 40 years ago has lasted far longer than she ever could have imagined. Coming up next on A&E.